Thomas McKenna wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped down from the dusty stagecoach in the small town of Cedar Springs, Arizona Territory. The year was 1887, and the desert heat seemed to press against him like a heavy blanket. He carried only a worn leather satchel and $50 in his pocket, everything he owned in the world after losing his farm back in Missouri to the bank. The town looked like many others he had seen during his journey west. A main street lined with wooden buildings, their paint peeling under the relentless sun. The saloon, general store, and bank stood side by side, while horses tied to hitching posts swished their tails at persistent flies. Dust seemed to cover everything, giving the whole place a golden-brown color that matched the surrounding desert landscape. Thomas walked into the general store, the wooden floorboards creaking under his boots. The storekeeper, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from behind the counter where he was sorting through mail. "Afternoon, stranger," the man said with a friendly nod. "Name's Henry Walsh. You look like you've traveled a fair distance." "Thomas McKenna," he replied, extending his hand. "I've come from Missouri, looking for a fresh start. I heard there might be land available in these parts." Henry's face lit up with interest. "Well now, that's interesting timing. I happen to know about a ranch that just came available. The previous owner, old Jake Morrison, passed away last month. Had no family, so the bank is looking to sell it quick." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. A ranch of his own had been his dream for years. "What kind of ranch? How much land?" "About 200 acres. Good grazing land with a water source running through it. Has a house, barn, and corrals already built. The strange thing is, the bank is asking only $50 for the whole spread." Thomas could hardly believe what he was hearing. $50 was exactly what he had in his pocket, but it seemed too good to be true. Why so cheap? What's wrong with it? Henry shifted uncomfortably and glanced around the store as if making sure no one else was listening. "Well, that's the peculiar part. Seems like there's been some unusual happenings out there. Jake Morrison claimed he saw Apache women on his property regular-like, but when folks went to check, they never found any sign of them. Some say Jake was just getting old and seeing things, but others think there might be more to it." The mention of Apache made Thomas pause. He had heard stories about the Apache people, fierce warriors who knew the desert better than anyone. Most of the Apache had been moved to reservations by the government, but some small groups still lived free in the remote areas of the territory. "Are they dangerous?" Thomas asked. Henry shrugged. "The Apache around here have been peaceful for the most part. The big conflicts ended a few years back when Geronimo surrendered. But folks are still nervous about any Apache presence, which is probably why no one wants to buy the ranch." Thomas thought carefully about his options. He had traveled too far to turn back now, and $50 would not last him long in town. Taking a risk on the ranch seemed like his only real choice. "Where can I find someone at the bank to discuss this?" he asked. Henry pointed toward the door. "Just down the street. Ask for Mr. Benjamin Carter, the bank president. Tell him I sent you." 20 minutes later, Thomas found himself sitting across from a well-dressed man with a thick mustache and worried eyes. Mr. Carter spread out a map on his desk and pointed to a marked area about 10 miles northeast of town. "This is the Morrison Ranch," Carter explained. "Like I'm sure Henry told you, it's a good piece of property with plenty of water and grass. The buildings are solid, built to last. Jake Morrison was a good rancher who took care of the place." Thomas studied the map carefully. The ranch sat in a valley between two small mountain ranges, with a creek running right through the middle of the property. It looked perfect for raising cattle or horses. "The price seems very low," Thomas said. "Is there something I should know about?" Carter sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I'll be straight with you, Mr. McKenna. There have been reports of Apache presence on or near the property. Now, I'm not saying they're hostile or anything like that, but it makes people nervous. The truth is, we need to sell this ranch, and you're the first person with cash money who's shown real interest." Thomas considered this information. He had dealt with difficult situations before, and the thought of Apache neighbors did not terrify him as much as it might have frightened others. He had always believed in treating all people with respect, regardless of their background. "If I buy this ranch, do I get clear title to the land?" "Absolutely," Carter said, pulling out legal documents. "Full ownership, recorded with the territorial government. The land is yours to do with as you please, within the law, of course." Thomas reached into his pocket and counted out $50 in bills and coins. "I'll take it." Carter's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Just like that? Don't you want to see the property first?" "I trust your description," Thomas said. "Besides, I need a place to start over, and this seems like my best opportunity." The paperwork took less than an hour to complete. By late afternoon, Thomas McKenna was the legal owner of 200 acres of Arizona Territory rangeland. Carter arranged for him to borrow a horse and basic supplies from the general store, which he could pay back once he got settled. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Thomas rode out of Cedar Springs toward his new home. The desert landscape was beautiful in its own harsh way, with tall saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels and colorful wildflowers blooming despite the dry conditions. The air smelled of sage and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled a lonesome song. The ranch was exactly where the map indicated, nestled in a green valley that seemed like an oasis in the surrounding desert. The house was a sturdy adobe structure with a red tile roof, much larger than Thomas had expected. The barn and corrals were well built and in good condition, and he could hear the peaceful sound of water flowing in the creek. Thomas dismounted and walked slowly around his new property as darkness began to fall. Everything seemed perfect, almost too good to be true. He unsaddled his borrowed horse and led it to the corral, where he found hay and grain already stored in the barn. Jake Morrison had left the place well supplied. Inside the house, Thomas found simple but comfortable furnishings. The main room had a stone fireplace, wooden table and chairs, and even some books on a shelf. The bedroom contained a sturdy bed and dresser, while the kitchen was equipped with everything needed for basic cooking. Coal oil lamps provided light, and there was plenty of fuel stored in a shed outside. As Thomas prepared a simple meal of beans and hardtack, he felt more hopeful than he had in months. This ranch represented a chance to build a new life, far from the failures and disappointments of his past. He was grateful for the opportunity, even if it came with some uncertainty about Apache neighbors. After eating, he sat on the front porch and watched the stars appear in the clear desert sky. The silence was complete, except for the creak and distant night sounds of the desert. For the first time in years, Thomas felt truly peaceful. He was about to head inside for the night when he noticed movement near the creek. 3 figures were walking along the water's edge, moving silently through the moonlight. Thomas squinted and tried to get a better look, but the figures seemed to blend with the shadows of the cottonwood trees that lined the creek bank. His heart began to beat faster as he realized the figures appeared to be women, dressed in traditional Apache clothing. They moved with a grace and quietness that spoke of years of desert living, stopping occasionally to examine something near the water or to look in his direction. Thomas remained perfectly still, not wanting to frighten them or provoke any kind of confrontation. He watched as the 3 women continued their mysterious activity along the creek for nearly an hour before disappearing into the darkness as silently as they had appeared. When morning came, Thomas walked down to the creek to investigate. He found clear footprints in the soft mud near the water's edge, confirming that his midnight visitors had been real and not just imagination or desert dreams. The prints were small and delicate, definitely made by women, and the pattern of the footwear was distinctly Apache. Standing there in the bright morning sunlight, looking at the evidence of his nighttime visitors, Thomas realized his new life was going to be more complicated and interesting than he had anticipated. The previous owner, Jake Morrison, had not been seeing things after all. There were indeed Apache women using this land, and now Thomas had to figure out how to share his ranch with neighbors he had not expected to find. Thomas spent the next 3 days learning about his new property and establishing a routine. Each morning, he walked the boundaries of his land, checking the condition of fences and water sources. He discovered that the ranch was even better than he had imagined. With rich grass in the valley bottom and good shelter from winter winds provided by the surrounding hills. On the 4th morning, as he was repairing a section of corral fencing, Thomas heard the soft sound of approaching footsteps. He looked up to see the 3 Apache women walking toward him across the meadow near the creek. In the bright daylight, he could see them clearly for the first time. The oldest of the 3 appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair braided down her back and wearing a traditional Apache dress decorated with intricate beadwork. Her face was weathered by years of desert sun, but showed intelligence and strength in every line. The second woman looked to be about 30, tall and graceful with alert dark eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Thomas and his activities. The youngest appeared to be barely 20, with a shy manner but curious expression. Thomas set down his hammer and stood slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements that might alarm them. The 3 women stopped about 20 feet away and studied him carefully. The silence stretched for several long moments as both sides evaluated each other. Finally, the oldest woman spoke in English, though with a distinct accent. "You are the new owner of this land." "Yes, ma'am," Thomas replied respectfully, removing his hat. "My name is Thomas McKenna. I bought this ranch from the bank in Cedar Springs." The woman nodded slowly. "I am called Maria by the white people. This is my daughter Elena, and my granddaughter Rosa. We have been coming to this place for many seasons to gather plants and use the sacred water." Thomas felt relief that they could communicate in English, though he wondered what she meant by sacred water. "I'm pleased to meet you all. I had heard that Apache families sometimes visited this area." Maria's expression remained serious. "The old man, Morrison, he understood our need to come here. He did not try to stop us or cause trouble." "We hope you will be the same kind of man." Thomas considered her words carefully. It was clear that these women had some kind of arrangement with the previous owner that allowed them to use parts of his land. While he was the legal owner now, he also understood that Apache people had been living in this area for countless generations before any white settlers arrived. "What kind of plants do you gather here?" he asked, genuinely curious. Elena, the middle-aged woman, stepped forward and pointed toward the creek. "Medicine plants grow near the water. Willow bark for pain, wild tobacco for ceremonies, cattail roots for food. This valley has always provided for our people." Rosa, the youngest, spoke for the first time in a voice barely above a whisper. "The spring where the water comes from the rocks is sacred to our grandmother's grandmother. We come to pray and make offerings." Thomas looked in the direction she indicated and saw a spot where clear water bubbled up from among large boulders about a quarter-mile upstream. He had noticed the spring during his exploration of the property, but had not realized its spiritual significance. "I don't want to interfere with your traditions," Thomas said sincerely. "Perhaps we can work out some arrangement that allows you to continue gathering plants and visiting the sacred spring." Maria studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to judge whether his words were truthful. "You would allow this, even though the law says this land belongs to you now?" "The law is one thing," Thomas replied. "Doing what's right is another. Your people were here long before I arrived, and I respect that. Besides, this ranch is much too large for one man to use every part of it." The 3 women exchanged glances and had a brief conversation in Apache. Thomas could not understand their words, but their tones seemed to indicate surprise and cautious hope. Maria turned back to him. "We would like to make a proposal. In exchange for permission to continue our gathering and ceremonies, we would help you with tasks around the ranch. We know this land better than anyone, and we know how to live in the desert without wasting water or harming the earth." Thomas felt intrigued by this offer. He had been wondering how he would manage such a large property by himself, especially since he was still learning about desert ranching. "What kind of help are you thinking about?" Elena answered this time. "We can show you which areas have the best grass for cattle, where to find wild horses, how to dig wells that will not run dry. Rosa is skilled at treating sick animals with plant medicines. I know how to preserve meat and vegetables to last through the winter. And I," Maria added with a slight smile, "know how to deal with the Apache raiders who sometimes pass through this area. They will not trouble a ranch that is under our protection." This last point struck Thomas as particularly valuable. While most Apache had been moved to reservations, he had heard that small bands still roamed free in the remote desert areas, sometimes taking cattle or horses from isolated ranches. "That sounds like a fair arrangement," Thomas said. "You can gather your plants and use the sacred spring whenever you need to, and I would be grateful for your help and advice about ranching in this country." Rosa smiled shyly at his words, while Elena nodded approvingly. Maria, however, still looked serious. "There is one more thing you should know. We do not live on the reservation like most of our people. We stay free in the old way, moving with the seasons and living as our ancestors did. Sometimes government men come looking for us." Thomas understood the implications of what she was telling him. Harboring Apache who were avoiding the reservation could bring him trouble with territorial authorities. But looking at these three women, who seemed peaceful and respectful, he could not imagine turning them away. "If anyone asks, I'll say I hired you as ranch hands," he said. That's the truth, after all. For the first time, Maria smiled broadly. "You are a good man, Thomas McKenna. We will not forget this kindness." Over the following weeks, Thomas discovered that his new partners were invaluable teachers and helpers. Elena showed him where previous flash floods had carved dangerous arroyos that could trap cattle during storms. She taught him to read the signs that predicted when the summer rains would come and how to prepare for both drought and flood conditions. Rosa proved to be amazingly skilled with animals. When Thomas's borrowed horse developed a limp, she found and prepared a poultice from desert plants that healed the injury completely within a few days. She also showed him how to identify which cacti produced edible fruits and how to harvest them safely. Maria shared her knowledge of the broader area, pointing out landmarks that helped with navigation and telling him which nearby ranchers were honest in their dealings and which ones to avoid. She also taught him some basic words in Apache and explained customs that would help him show proper respect when dealing with other native people. In return, Thomas shared his supplies and helped the women with tasks that required tools or skills they did not possess. He repaired torn clothing with needle and thread, built them a small shelter near the sacred spring where they could store ceremonial items, and taught them some farming techniques that could help them grow vegetables near the creek. The arrangement worked so well that Thomas began to forget there had ever been a time when he lived alone on the ranch. The three women became part of his daily routine, and he found their company both helpful and pleasant. Elena had a practical sense of humor that often made him laugh, while Rosa's gentle nature reminded him of his younger sister back in Missouri. Maria, despite her serious demeanor, proved to be a storyteller who could spin fascinating tales about Apache history and legends. One evening in late summer, as they sat around a small fire near the creek, Maria shared a story that helped Thomas understand why this particular valley was so important to her family. "Many generations ago," she began, "when the world was younger and the Apache nation was strong, my great-great-grandmother lived in this valley with her family. It was during the time when the first Spanish soldiers came north from Mexico, looking for gold and slaves." Thomas listened intently as Maria continued her tale. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the cottonwood trees. The Spanish found this valley and saw how green and beautiful it was. They wanted to take it for themselves and make the Apache people work for them like slaves. But my great-great-grandmother was a powerful medicine woman who knew how to speak with the spirits of the water and earth. Rosa and Elena had heard this story many times before, but they listened with the same attention as Thomas, clearly treasuring their family history. When the Spanish soldiers came to drive them out, my great-great-grandmother went to the sacred spring and made offerings to the water spirits. She asked them to protect this place and keep it safe for her children and their children after them. The spirits agreed, but they said the protection would only last as long as her family continued to care for the land and water with respect. Maria paused to add more wood to the fire, and sparks danced up into the star-filled sky. The next morning, the Spanish soldiers found that all their horses had disappeared during the night. Their water barrels had developed mysterious leaks, and several men became sick with strange fevers. They decided this valley was cursed and left to look for easier places to conquer. Thomas found himself completely absorbed in the story. "And your family has been taking care of this place ever since?" "Yes," Maria said solemnly. "Through all the generations, through wars and treaties, through good times and bad times, someone from our family has always come here to gather medicine plants and make offerings at the sacred spring. It is our responsibility to keep the old promises." This explanation helped Thomas understand why his willingness to share the land meant so much to the three women. He was not just providing access to useful resources, he was helping them maintain a sacred trust that connected them to their ancestors and their spiritual beliefs. As autumn approached, Thomas realized that his $50 investment had brought him much more than he had ever expected. He now owned a productive ranch, had gained 3 skilled partners, and felt more at home in the Arizona desert than he ever had in Missouri. The Apache women had taught him not just how to succeed as a rancher, but how to live in harmony with the land and respect the traditions of those who had come before. Winter came early to the Arizona territory that year, bringing unexpected snow to the desert valleys and creating challenges that Thomas had never imagined when he bought the ranch. The 3 Apache women had moved their camp closer to the main house, building a traditional winter shelter called a wickiup from bent poles covered with brush and hides. Thomas had used his modest savings to purchase a small herd of 20 cattle from a rancher near Tucson, and the animals were thriving on the rich grass of his valley. Elena had helped him select the best locations for winter grazing, while Rosa's knowledge of desert plants had kept the cattle healthy through the changing seasons. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until the morning in February when Thomas woke to find strange men examining his cattle from horseback. Through his window, he counted at least 6 riders, all heavily armed and wearing the kind of clothes that suggested they were not honest ranchers or legitimate businessmen. Thomas quickly dressed and stepped onto his porch, his rifle in hand but not pointed threateningly. The men noticed him immediately and rode closer to the house. Their leader, a tall man with a black beard and cold eyes, dismounted and walked forward with an arrogant swagger. "Morning," the man said in a voice that held no friendliness. "Name's Jack Harrison. Me and my boys are looking for some stolen cattle, and we think you might have them." Thomas studied the men carefully. He had heard stories about cattle rustlers who used false accusations as an excuse to steal livestock from small ranchers. These men had the look of outlaws rather than legitimate lawmen or ranchers. "I bought these cattle legally from Miguel Santos near Tucson," Thomas replied evenly. "I have the bill of sale and brand registration papers inside the house." Harrison laughed unpleasantly. "Papers can be forged, friend. These cattle match the description of animals stolen from my ranch last month. I'm afraid I'm going to have to take them back." Thomas felt his heart sink. 20 cattle represented most of his investment in the ranch, and losing them would probably force him to give up his new life. However, he also realized that 6 armed men against 1 would not be a fair fight. regardless of who was right or wrong. "I'd be happy to show you my papers," Thomas said, hoping to buy time while he figured out what to do. "Won't be necessary," Harrison said with a sneer. "Boys, start gathering up those cattle. We'll be taking them with us." As the rustlers began moving toward the herd, Thomas heard a soft whistle from the direction of the creek. It was a signal that Elena had taught him, meaning that help was nearby. He felt a surge of hope and tried to keep Harrison talking to give his friends time to act. "Now hold on," Thomas said loudly. "You can't just take a man's cattle without proper legal process. If you really think these animals were stolen, we should go to the sheriff in Cedar Springs and sort this out properly." Harrison's hand moved closer to his gun. "I don't think you're in a position to make demands, McKenna. My boys and I outnumber you considerably." What happened next seemed almost like magic to Thomas. Rosa appeared silently behind one of the mounted rustlers and used a long stick to spook his horse, causing the animal to buck and throw its rider to the ground. At the same time, Elena emerged from the brush near the cattle and let out a wild Apache war cry that spooked the entire herd, causing them to scatter in different directions. The most dramatic intervention came from Maria, who stepped out from behind the barn carrying an old but well-maintained rifle. She spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority across the valley. "Jack Harrison," she called out, using his name in a way that made it clear she knew exactly who he was. "You are trespassing on protected land. Leave now, or face the consequences." Harrison spun around to face this new threat, his hand hovering near his pistol. When he saw Maria, his face went pale with recognition and what looked like fear. "I know you," he said in a voice that had lost much of its earlier confidence. "You're the Apache woman they call Ghost Walker. I heard you were dead." Maria smiled coldly. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. What is very real is the protection that covers this valley and all who live here with honor. You and your men are not welcome." Thomas watched in fascination as the dynamic of the confrontation shifted completely. The rustlers, who had seemed so confident moments earlier, now appeared nervous and uncertain. Even their horses seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, dancing and snorting with anxiety. "This is just a misunderstanding," Harrison said, backing toward his horse. "We'll be moving on." "Yes, you will," Maria agreed. "And you will tell others who might have similar ideas that the McKenna Ranch is under Apache protection. Any who come here with evil intentions will find more trouble than they bargained for." As the rustlers gathered their scattered companions and prepared to leave, Elena and Rosa efficiently herded the cattle back toward the safety of the corral near the house. Thomas marveled at how quickly the three women had turned a desperate situation into a victory. Harrison mounted his horse and looked down at Thomas with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. "This isn't over, McKenna. You may have Apache friends now, but they won't always be around to protect you." Maria stepped forward, her rifle still ready. "My family has been protecting this land for more generations than your people have been in this territory, Harrison. We will be here long after you are forgotten." The rustlers rode away quickly, and Thomas did not expect to see them again. As their dust cloud disappeared over the eastern hills, he turned to thank the three women who had saved his ranch, and possibly his life. "I can't begin to tell you how grateful I am," he said sincerely. "Without your help, I would have lost everything." Elena smiled and began checking the cattle to make sure none had been injured during the commotion. "We protect our friends, just as you protected our right to use this land. That is how good partnerships work." Rosa was examining the ground where the rustlers had been standing, reading signs that Thomas could not see. "They will not come back," she announced confidently. "They are more afraid of grandmother's reputation than they are greedy for cattle." Thomas looked at Maria with new respect and curiosity. "Ghost Walker? What does that name mean?" Maria's expression became thoughtful, as if she were deciding how much to reveal about her past. "In my younger days, I was a scout and warrior for my people during the conflicts with the army and Mexican soldiers. I learned how to move unseen and strike without warning. Some of our enemies believed I was a spirit who could appear and disappear at will. This revelation helped Thomas understand why the rustlers had been so intimidated by Maria's presence. Her reputation as a formidable fighter had preceded her, even into the criminal underworld of cattle thieves and outlaws. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Thomas asked. "It is not good to live in the past," Maria replied simply. "I came here seeking peace, not to frighten new friends with old war stories." Over the following days, Thomas learned more about the remarkable backgrounds of his three partners. Elena had been married to a cavalry scout and had lived for several years on various military posts, which explained her excellent command of English and her knowledge of both Apache and American customs. Rosa had been educated for 2 years at a mission school before deciding to return to traditional Apache ways of life. Most surprisingly, Maria had actually met and negotiated with famous Apache leaders, including Geronimo and Cochise, during the height of the Apache Wars. Her skills as a diplomat and her reputation as a warrior had made her an important figure among her people, though she had chosen to step back from leadership roles as she grew older. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities to the ranch. Word had spread about the confrontation with the rustlers, and Thomas found that his reputation among neighboring ranchers had improved significantly. Having Apache protection was seen as a valuable asset in a territory where outlaws and raiders were constant threats. Miguel Santos, the rancher from whom Thomas had bought his original cattle, rode out to the valley with a proposal for a partnership. He wanted to lease some of Thomas's land for summer grazing and was willing to pay well for the privilege. The arrangement would provide Thomas with steady income while helping Santos expand his operation. "I heard about your trouble with Jack Harrison," Santos said as they discussed the deal. "That man has been stealing cattle throughout this region for years, but no one has been able to prove it or catch him in the act. Having him afraid to come near your ranch is good news for all of us honest ranchers." Elena helped negotiate the lease agreement, using her knowledge of local business practices to ensure that Thomas got fair terms. Her experience living in both worlds made her an excellent intermediary when dealing with people who were not familiar with Apache customs. As summer approached, Thomas realized that his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined when he paid $50 for a remote ranch. He had gained not just property, but a family of sorts, and protection that money could not buy. The 3 Apache women had become integral to every aspect of his operation, and he could no longer imagine trying to run the ranch without their help. The partnership had also changed the women's lives in positive ways. Having a legal base of operations allowed them to interact more freely with the outside world when they chose to do so. Rosa had begun learning to read and write from Thomas, while Elena had started a small business selling traditional Apache crafts to people in Cedar Springs. Maria continued to serve as the spiritual guardian of the sacred spring, but she also began sharing some of her historical knowledge with a schoolteacher from town who was interested in preserving Apache stories and traditions. Her experiences during the Apache Wars provided valuable first-hand accounts of events that were already becoming legends. One evening in late summer, as they sat by the creek watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in brilliant colors, Thomas reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all together. "You know," he said to his 3 friends, "when I bought this ranch, I thought I was just getting land and buildings. I never imagined I would gain partners, teachers, and protectors all at the same time." Maria smiled and gestured toward the sacred spring, where clear water continued to bubble up from ancient rocks, just as it had for countless generations. "The spirits of this place have ways of bringing together people who need each other. Your willingness to share the land with respect opened the door for friendship and mutual help." Elena nodded in agreement. "In the old days, Apache and white people often fought because they could not find ways to share the earth. Here, we have proven that different peoples can work together when they treat each other with honor. Rosa, who had grown more confident over the months, added her own perspective. This ranch has become home for all of us in different ways. Grandfather's dream of a place where our traditions can continue safely has come true. Thomas looked around at the valley that had become his home, with its green grass, flowing water, and protective mountains. The cattle grazed peacefully in the meadows, while somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its evening song to the rising stars. His $50 investment had brought him everything he had dreamed of, and much more. He owned a successful ranch, had gained the friendship and respect of remarkable people, and felt more at peace than he ever had in his previous life. Most importantly, he had learned that true wealth came not from what a person owned, but from the relationships they built and the respect they showed for the land and all who shared it. As night fell over the Arizona territory, Thomas McKenna knew that his greatest adventure was just beginning. With his 3 Apache friends beside him, he was ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring to their shared valley home.